John Cameron Swayze.
Ed Huntley. David Bridges. John Chen. Tom Brokaw.
Not guilty. Superstar Michael Jackson acquitted of all charges in his child molestation trial. Tonight, the reaction here and overseas, and what happens now. Saddam on tape questioned about mass murders of his own people. Tonight, new details about the trial that could finally hold him accountable. Race matters. On a day when the Supreme Court rules on race in jury selection, an apology tonight in Congress for a shameful chapter in American history. Last stop, NBC News goes south of the border to the small Mexican town that's the capital of illegal immigration into the U.S. Tonight, what goes on here and what the Border Patrol is up against.
From NBC News World Headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams.
Good evening. Michael Jackson is a free man tonight. He was acquitted today of all charges, pronounced not guilty on the 7th day of jury deliberations. His lawyers tried very hard to paint a portrait of an innocent, modern-day Peter Pan, a childlike 46-year-old man who simply loves children. In the end, the jury decided the evidence of child molestation and other charges was not enough, and in siding with Jackson's defense, they handed prosecutors a big loss in a very public case. Our coverage begins tonight with NBC's Mike Taibbi. Mike, good evening.
Evening, Brian. For more than a dozen years, there have been rumors fueled by a tabloid frenzy and obsession with Michael Jackson, 2 payoffs to earlier accusers that amounted to millions of dollars, and finally, starting in January, a trial in this case that lasted for scores of witnesses and finally came to a conclusion with that series of not guilties, 10 in all, at the end of the second week in June.
Keeping things in check.
When a British documentary in February 2003 repeated old rumors about Jackson, it also wrung this admission from him.
The most loving thing to do is to share your bed with someone.
That the pop star shared his bedroom with children, innocently, he said, including boys like this young cancer survivor. But that was enough to trigger a criminal investigation by a district attorney who had pursued Jackson for a decade.
Get over here and get checked in.
It took almost a year, but Jackson was arrested. The core of a 10-count indictment, the charge that on at least 4 occasions at his Neverland Ranch, he had given alcohol to that cancer patient and then molested him. It was a difficult case. The boy and his siblings and mother all proved to be such credibility-challenged witnesses in the trial that most experts thought their testimony alone would not have led to a conviction.
Unless there's physical evidence, if this jury doesn't believe this boy, then there's no case.
But California is one of only a handful of states that in sex crimes trials allows testimony about old, unproven allegations. 3 of Jackson's alleged victims, notably the actor Macaulay Culkin, came to court to emphatically deny any inappropriate behavior by Jackson ever. But the cumulative effect of all that so-called propensity evidence, including Jackson's settlements with 2 earlier accusers, was undeniably powerful.
Critically important, powerful, but not enough to persuade this jury that the burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt had been met. And a short time ago, those jurors, all 12 primary jurors and 8 alternates, answered some questions about how they reached the decision they did.
I think we all just looked at the evidence and pretty much agreed.
I would just say that we considered all of the evidence, and of course, since it's a criminal trial, it had to be beyond a reasonable doubt. And in looking at all of the evidence and not just one specific item, I mean, that's the conclusion we arrived at.
And arrived at that decision in less than 7 full days of deliberation. A reminder, we have not yet heard from Michael Jackson himself, who's now returned to his Neverland Ranch, or from his lead attorney, Tom Mesereau. We're expecting to hear something from Mesereau at some point. Back to you, Brian.
Mike Taibbi in Santa Maria, California for us. Mike, thanks. This was the most covered trial of all time in terms of accredited media, over 2,000 of them, watching every move, and word of a verdict caused a frenzy in their ranks late today. 2 legal experts who have watched it all are with us tonight for analysis. Veteran defense attorney Roy Black and Jim Thomas, the former Santa Barbara County Sheriff. Good evening to you both. And Roy, we'll start with you, your summation of the defense job here.
Well, I thought the defense obviously did a wonderful job. If they lost, of course, we'd be saying they were horrible. But, Brian, the real take on this, I cynically thought the jury would be overwhelmed by these prior bad acts, his bizarre lifestyle, the makeup and all of that, and not focus on the evidence, which I thought was pretty weak. We have to give the jury a lot of credit here, more than the lawyers, I think.
And Jim Thomas, what does the prosecution, especially Tom Sneddon, what do they do now with their kind of palpable frustration with the lifestyle and what they believe going on inside the Jackson Ranch?
Well, they move on, Brian. You know, we're a system of justice, and sometimes you win cases, sometimes you lose cases. Obviously, this is a very disappointing one personally for Tom Sneddon, but he understands the system, he accepts it, moves on. If Michael Jackson is indeed doing the kinds of acts that he was accused of in this case, they may see him again someday. We would hope not.
Jim Thomas, Roy Black, thank you for your contributions tonight and throughout our coverage. And now to the reaction, as is the case when any big news event is happening. Crowds in Times Square here in New York paused to watch the television coverage and see the verdict as it unfolded. And from Times Square around the world, for that matter, the not guilty verdicts reverberated. NBC's Keith Miller is with us tonight from London. Keith, good evening.
Well, Brian, the outcome of the Michael Jackson trial was a drama conducted on an international stage. It was the verdict heard round the world.
Not guilty on all counts.
Cable TV in a dozen countries broadcast live coverage of the final minutes in the Michael Jackson trial.
This is what we're going to hear of that audio feed.
Sky News in Britain even displayed a countdown clock to maximize the drama.
What's your verdict?
Journalists from 34 nations had descended on California to cover the trial. The verdict headlined news in Germany, France, and right across the Middle East. The Arab satellite channel Al Arabiya, usually focused on the conflict in Iraq, switched to the subject of celebrity and sex. Unlike in the United States, Jackson is still very much the king of pop.
He's amazing!
His albums sell better in some European and Asian nations than in the United States.
I think that the Europeans really think of Michael Jackson as some surreal kind of Peter Pan-like character.
To his millions of fans worldwide, the not guilty verdicts will come as a relief. And tonight, the Michael Jackson fan website in Britain took so many hits it kept crashing. Jackson fans here are not planning any public celebrations, Brian, but thousands are expected here in London in August to mark Jackson's 47th birthday. Brian?
Keith Miller in our London bureau tonight, and there will be more coverage later tonight of the Jackson trial and this outcome, beginning with a special edition of Dateline NBC at 8, 7 Central on this NBC station. Coverage throughout the evening as well on MSNBC on cable, and of course a complete wrap-up tomorrow morning on Today. Now to a different trial that the world will be watching, the trial of Saddam Hussein. The special tribunal in charge of that trial has released new film of Saddam, though there's no sound with it. It's the first fresh video we've seen of him in nearly a year, and on it, he's being questioned about some of the mass murders he's accused of committing. We get the story tonight from NBC's Jim Maseda.
NBC News has learned that the video released today by the Iraqi Special Tribunal was shot on Sunday, according to Khalil El-Doulaimi, one of Saddam Hussein's lawyers, seen here in the blue suit. Saddam, thinner and grayer than in his final days in power, appeared relaxed and focused. Very different from the defiant, often disoriented man the world saw last July when arraigned on broad charges of crimes against humanity.
He looks...
Good morning. Victory.